So, good evening, everybody. We continue today with Perek Mem Ches, starting this new chapter. It was indeed interesting that Perek Mem Zayin, interesting. It was rare to finish or to do a chapter with one class, but it's relatively a smaller chapter with one message, basically one important, unique, and an all-encompassing message. As we learned last week, as we mentioned all the time, you can see this past class, Perek Mem Zayin, and all the previous classes on the TanyaOnline.com website, which there's an advantage, as we mentioned numerous times, many times, that it's easy to follow the class simply because the way it's set up. The text has a separate scroll bar. Again, easy access to all the previous classes, which come up in the same fashion. So we begin Perek Mem Ches. V'hinei kasher yizbeinin hamaskil b'dulas ein sof baruch hu ki kishmei ken hu. When the intellect will ponder, literally translated, will ponder in the greatness of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, blessed be He, ki kishmei ken hu ein sof ve'ein ketz v'tachlis klal leir v'chayis hamispashit mimenu yizbarich. That when we say Ein Sof, it is literally so, that it's infinite and there's no end to the light and the energy which evolves from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, B'Ritzoni HaPashut, with His desire, which is Pashut, which means it's divested of any details or any reason for this desire, because of its pshitus, it is one with Hashem Himself, betachas hayichud, with the ultimate unity. In other words, because it's the Hashem's rotzein decided to extend Himself in this infinite manner. As we know, when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's no such a thing to say, oh, because He is, therefore there has to be a light emanating from Him. In other words, for example, a candle. There's the mo'ir, the core, the fire of the candle, and then there's the air, the light which extends itself from the candle. So when you put a candle, the candle doesn't have to make a decision to extend its air, to extend its lichtigkeit, its light. And to the contrary, it can't make a decision not to share and extend its light. If there's a moir, if there's an illuminator, there is light which extends from it. The sun, for example, the sun is the illuminator, and then you have the ray of the sun, of this luminescent. It can't, and this is what made La'aretz L'Dar Maleh, this what shines, and this what warms us up, and this what brightens up the world. But the sun doesn't make a decision, now I want to extend the light from me. And again, not only does it make that decision, it doesn't have a choice. It can't make a decision the other way around. If there's a sun, there's air. If there's more, there's air. When it comes to Hashem, and when you speak about Hashem and His air, Ein Sof, His infinite light, it's not so. It's a light which emanates from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, B'Ritzoni, with His, because of Hashem makes a decision. It's His desire that there should be an emanation, there should be a revelation of Hashem's Eir. And because He's infinite, so the Eir Ein Sof, the Eir is truly infinite. And it says in a number of places, this is also the Rotzein HaPashut is also carries that very Eir Ein Sof itself, but the simple meaning is the Rotzein HaPashut of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to extend this Eir, because and this Rotzein is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's one with the core essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is infinite. So too the light which emanates from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, B'Ritzoni HaPashut, which is one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu Himself. This Rotzein, this desire, is one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which, as we know, this comes up numerous times in Tanya he explains when he defines, not in this context at all for that matter, when he speaks about Hashem's Rotzein. Hashem has a desire that you to do a mitzvah. Hashem has a desire you should blow shofar Rosh Hashanah. Hashem has a desire that one puts on tefillin after 13 years old. A man puts on tefillin after 13 years old. And so on all the other mitzvahs. What are mitzvahs called? Mitzvahs are called Ritzoynei Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the desire of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So one would say, so I'm not really connecting to Hashem. I'm connecting to His desire. Like you find by the human being. There is the person, and this is what he wants. And so too when it comes to Torah, Torah is called Chochmah Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? It's a pasuk, Chochmas B'minaschem Leini Kol Amim, it's your wisdom, your understanding in the eyes of all the nations, a pasuk in Chumash Dvarim. And in Chumash Dvarim, that is. So we know Chochmah. Torah is Chochmah. We understand, we can appreciate it not only because Torah tells us. You look at the Gemara, it's Chochmah. Chochmah B'minaschem Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Of Hashem. So one's going to say, well, so wait, so when I learn Torah, I'm connecting to something very holy, very extremely sacred, connecting to Hashem's wisdom, but not really to Hashem. Again, because we use ourselves as a example for the way the etzem, the rotzein, the chokhmah, in other words, the way it's set up by ourselves. We use ourselves as a parable to this which is on high. And on the contrary, the reason why we use ourselves because we are an extension of this which is on high, like the Alter Rebbe writes in Peri Gimel in Tanya, in Likutei Moharan Peri Gimel. Nishtal shlumihen, we come, we evolve from the way it's on high, but no, there's a difference. And this is one of the things, again, the Alter Rebbe repeats many times, because in the end of the day, for that matter, in this previous chapter, he says when Hashem gave us His Torah, He gave us Himself, because Hashem, His desire and His wisdom are one, unlike the way it is by the human being, that there's Him, His desires, then His wisdom. Many people exist, they don't have wisdom, they simply don't have, they don't have the ability to appreciate, to perceive, to grasp any concept, but they exist independent of any chokhmah. Now somewhere potentially there is chokhmah by every human being, but just to appreciate it, the way to understand the stark difference, the contrast, and the way it is by the human being, by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by the human being itself. There's I, and there's what I want, and there's what I understand, my chokhmah, or the ability to understand, my faculties, my cognitive faculties. When it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when you learn Torah, you connect to Hashem Himself. Like the Gemara says, Anechi, as Ana Nafshi Ksavis Yahavis, Anechi, Hashem Alikecha, the first words we heard from HaKadosh Baruch Hu by Matan Torah, Seder Sadibris, the Ten Commandments, was Anechi. The Gemara said this is an acronym. Anechi is Ana Nafshi Ksavis Yahavis. Me, I put my soul, Hashem says, into Torah. You learn Torah, you're connected to me. And he says, Vicholi Truma, you do the mitzvah of Truma, you don't say Li U Truma, because that's Li, this is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so too, and again, and this is the context of mitzvahs. Hashem has a rotzain, Hashem has a desire. So by the average person, Him and His desire are separate. And the same thing, one would perhaps suggest Hashem's desire. Obviously, it's extremely holy and exalted. It's Hashem's desire. But that would, though, tell us that when I do a mitzvah, I connect to Hashem's desire, not about the core of Hashem. So we say, no, by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ritzeinim Chachmasi Echad, it's all one. It's mi yuchodim. Again, you could see on the top of the very page in the original text, they're one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hence, when I do a mitzvah, I connect to Hashem. I learn Torah, I connect to the core essence of Hashem. So too, again, in this context as well, when we speak about Beritzeni Aposhut, he right away says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mispashet this Ein Sof comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because of Hashem's Ratzon, He desires to do so, as we said before, the way it is by Hashem, as opposed to any moir and a luminescent, and the light coming from this luminescent. So the by Hashem, it's a decision, but that decision is it Hashem's Ratzon. I want to extend myself in a manner of Ein Sof, but that itself, that Ratzon, is one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the ultimate unity, and therefore ultimately when the Ein Sof extends itself from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Ein Sof extends himself from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's truly Ein Sof, it's truly infinite. We should never put anything associated with the world of finitude with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because Hashem is truly infinite, without any limitations at all. Ki kishmei kenhu, they just call Ein Sof Baruch Hu, it's Ein Sof, Ein Tachlis to the Ein V'chayis HaMizbach Mimenu. Now the question is, if that's the case, how could anything associated with the finite come to being? Because Baruch Hu is infinite. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu is infinite, how did anything finite come to be? So this we know, there is the idea of tzimtzum, that Hashem contracted his Eir, as the famous Lashon in Eitz Chaim, and the Arizal expounds on this, that there's different levels of tzimtzum, but namely it was that tzimtzum arishin, the original tzimtzum which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, so to say, the space, if you will, that is devoid of the energy of the Ein Sof, not devoid of the essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but that's not never a contradiction. Also, it writes in Tanya, in the Kudir many times, and the etzem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not about, and that's obviously everywhere. Hashem cannot remove himself from a particular place. That place would not exist at all. So when Hashem, obviously the etzem is always there, but etzem is not about gilui, it's not about revelation, and therefore there is no issue with the very core essence of Hashem. It's about the Ein Sof, the emanation, the light, the radiance which comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If it's infinite, so there's nothing finite could stand in its way, it'd be completely consumed into the infinite. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu took the Cholol, which is the Tzimtzum Rishon, he separated the Eir, he removed the Eir al Hatzad, as the expression, and there remains a space with, there is no Eir Ein Sof, the light of the infinite, so therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as it says, he took from the Eir, and he allowed one kav to trickle, one line, if you will, of Eir, of light, to trickle in to this space, but because it's on the onset of condensed type of energy, so it allowed Eilamis to exist, and then ultimately Eilam Atzilus, Mibriya, Yitzira, in other words, there's levels before that, as we learn Chassidus and Kabbalah, but then Atzilus as an Eilam, as great as Atzilus is, and it represents the Ein Sof, it houses the Ein Sof of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but yet it's an Eilam, it's a world which is, as the Gemara says, Eilam B'Lashon Hela B'Hester, by definition, it's a Metzias. Nothing could really stand in the way of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when you see an Eilam, or when you know there's an Eilam, even at Tzilus, we know, well, this cannot be in the face of the Ein Sof, as much as even it houses the Ein Sof, but it just houses the Ein Sof, in the end of the day, it's an Eilam with a Midas. Every Midah means measurement. This stuff doesn't, these phenomena don't exist in the face of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So they wish to remove his infinite light from this cholol, from this space, but that gave room that Eilamis could be created, emanated, and ultimately created, which is Bri, Yetzira, Asiyat. We have this physical world, which is the lowest of all. Ein Tachn L'Matimenu, it came in a fashion of physical. It's not even, in other words, in contrast to the other Eilamis, even the inferior worlds, they're still spiritual. This is a very physical, crass, and material world, which ultimately it needed a new level of tzimtzumim, as we said many times. We spoke about this in the past as well, that it's the Eilam Hasiyah, it's the lowest within Eilamis, and again it manifests in a very physical, mundane, and ultimately that is a new expression of Hagbala, a new image of Hagbala, of limitation as we could all know it, right? A table has a size from here to here, and it's tangible, and again you see its limitation from in every perspective and point of view of this table, and so on. The greatest creatures, the greatest created entities and beings, in the end of the day, they're limited. This is so many times bigger than this world, but nonetheless, it's so many times not one more time. There's a Lashon Rambam, how much the moon, the sun is bigger than the planet we live in, El Mazeh. But again, it's so many times not more. Everything has its limitation. The Hadas, in the end of the day, so this is what he says, that if anything would ultimately emanate from the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, would never be able to be any Eilam, even a lofty, holy, sacred, spiritual Eilam like Eilam Atzilus. Because in the end of the day, it's an Eilam, and in the face of the Ein Sof, in the face of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Eilamus cannot exist. Just mathematical, if you will. But it just, so that's what he says. Ve'iloi shtalshus Eilamus made in Sof Baruch Hu, if the emanation and the evolving of worlds would have been from the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, b'litzim tzumim, without any contraction, without any concealment, that it would be based on level, this descent of level, one level after the other, as in a way of cause and effect, meaning that just like the effect is related and connected to the cause, and so too this cause is the effect of the previous cause. And similar to the chain, that even though that every loop is a little lower level, but nonetheless you can say that there's a quantum leap step between this loop and the other, or even the highest to the lowest, because in the end you can follow the chain perfectly to see ultimately the connection of the lowest level to the highest level, even though that's complete so much higher. And especially when you're talking about a very long chain, so there's definitely the higher level of the chain, the lower level of the chain, but you can track the connection of the one loop to the lower, ultimately to the highest loop, because in the end of the day, that's the way they're connected. And so too, again, this is just an example. We're talking about the relationship of the cause and effect, which has an enormous relationship. This is the effect because of that cause, and that cause is the effect of a previous cause. So there is a connection and a relationship, if you will, between the lowest olu to the highest ila, the lowest cause to the highest, to the lowest effect to the highest cause. In other words, that there would be somewhat the connection between the lowest level of Eir to the highest level point of the Ein Sof. This world would never be able to come about. So it says a number of places in Siddur, nor this world, nor the supreme worlds, not even Bri Yitzirah, not even Atzilus, because in the end of the day, Atzilus is also an Eilam. Eilam cannot stand within the Ein Sof, but namely, or rather, more emphatic, we can appreciate this, that this very physical world would never be able to exist in the face of the Ein Sof. Even the Ein Sof would, again, it would allow itself to evolve level after level, even a billion levels and beyond. In the end of the day, when you're dealing with infinity, so the infinite energy would express itself on the lowest. In other words, after all these descend and level after level in a way of Ilaval, cause and effect, because it's infinite, this physical, finite world would never not only come into existence, but never be able to come into existence. The way it is now, which has an end, and it has a beginning, it has an end, and not only that, Mihod is within this world itself, as we know. As we know, this world, there is a limit how big the world is, and more so with B'min Ha'aretz L'Rakia Mahal Tov Shana. It says we know that there is the 7 Rakim, right? The Gemara says even the Echad, we proclaim and announce Hashem Echad. We're saying the Aleph, the oneness of all 7 heavens and earth, and the Dalid, which is the numerical value of Dalid, is 4, which are the 4 corners of the world, the 4 sides of the world, is all part of that oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, part of the Aleph, right? Aleph Ches Dalid. We pronounce the end of the Shema Yisrael, the verse Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which is again a proclamation, a demonstration of the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So in one word, we encapsulate the message that Hashem, you are Echad, that Aleph, which is a you are part of that, or the Ches, better said, the Ches, which is the numerical value of Ches is 8, which are the 7 heavens of the earth, and the Dalid, which is the numerical value, as we just mentioned, the Dalid is 4, which are the 4 sides of the world, and they're all part of the Aleph. Alufi Shaleim, all part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's, we mentioned many times, the whole point of Hashem Echad. It's not proclaiming Hashem Echad is not to say, well, there's only one God and not two or three or four. That's not the point of Hashem Echad. Hashem Echad is to say everything is about God. That when you see the seven heavens and the earth and you see the four corners of the world, don't think that there's Hashem and there is an Eilam dealing even with this very physical world. And Hashem is in charge, He controls because He created. But nonetheless, it's two entities. We say no. Hashem, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Everything is part of this Hashem Echad. Everything is part of the Hashem Echad. The Chadalid, the Ches, is part of the Aleph. So, in this, mentioning this because we know, again, this is a bit more, we familiarize ourselves with the idea of the seven heavens. And each one of the heavens says, so what is these? The Gemara says, how long would it take and how distant is the Rakia from the Aretz? So the Gemara says that if a person, a human being, would walk 500 years, he would get to the first Rakia. And then that Rakia itself is, the thickness of it is also how long it would take someone to walk 500 years. That's a long time. And you're dealing with this measurement is naturally not the human being actually walking 500 years. It's been a long time anybody lived 500 years, and also man cannot walk consecutive 500 years. He cannot walk consecutively even 1 year. A day is pushing it without any stop. He says theoretically, if a man would be able to walk 500 years, it just takes a certain amount of time, and that's the way. That's the distance from Oretz, from the land, to the first Rakia, the first heaven, just closer to us. Then you have the thickness of the heaven itself would take man 500 years to get from one side of the heaven to the other in its thickness, and then there's another, and then it would take another 500 years to get to the next level. Well, that sounds enormous. It just sounds so vast. A human being walking 500 years without any interruption. It's a huge space, and these are Rakim. They're huge, and between each one of them, it's humongous. But nonetheless, it's 500 and not 501. And so too, the thickness of the Rakia itself is 500, not 501. And they're not 501 years, not 501 in a day, because it says 500 is 500. That's as great and as vast and humongous as that sounds. In other words, in time and space, it's, in the end of the day, about a finite space, a finite duration, because it's 500, not 500 in a day. So that's what he says. A world the way it is now, in such a finite way, which from Oretz l'Rakia Malach Tov Kuf Shana, from the land to the first heaven, it would take 500 years to walk. So too, between every heaven and the other is also a walk of 500 years. Again, theoretically, how long it would take for man to walk 500 years. In other words, that duration of man walking 500 years, that is the space between every heaven. And say, so too, so too, the thickness of every heaven is also how much it would take a human being to walk for 500 years. So again, it sounds vast, it sounds so overwhelming, perhaps, if you will. But nonetheless, it is a total expression of limit, total expression of finite, a total expression of finitude, a total expression of limitation, rather, and and therefore, Hashem needed to do something totally different to allow this world to come to existence. Because if the Ein Sof would just evolve one level after the other, even millions and billions, myriads of different madregas levels after the other, again in the fashion of cause and effect. But at the end of the day, you're talking with the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this physical world, the way it's set up, with all its majestic components to it. It expresses over here something very, very unique. 500 years, but nonetheless, it is limited completely, and anything finite can never stand in the way of the infinite. this world would have thus not been created. And there the Alter Rebbe goes on and he says, not only this world, as we just mentioned, no world could stand in the face of the Ein Sof, of the expression of the infinite love of Kodesh Baruch Hu. It's impossible. And they said, even the world to come, Gan Eden and the supreme Gan Eden, we know there's different levels of Gan Eden, there's a number of places, multiple levels of Gan Eden, but generally it's divided to Gan Eden HaTachton, Gan Eden HaElyon, the lower Gan Eden and the higher Gan Eden. So he says, even Elam Haba, which is usually known as Gan Eden HaTachton, the inferior, and Gan Eden HaElyon, and this supreme Gan Eden, which is Modin Neshamas HaTzadikim Agdelim HaNeshamas Atzman, which is the domain of the great tzaddikim, and the original domain of the neshames, where the neshames initiate from. So they initiate naturally from yet a higher place, Chachmillah Datzils, like Dr. writes in the second chapter of Tanya. But nonetheless, they have their place where they manifest and they stand in a or as it says, Chatzuvim mitachas kisi akovet, from their carved from the Kisei HaKavod, Hashem's throne, which we know is Elam Habriya, which is the Elam Habriya, that's where the Gan Eden HaElyon is. So he says, Afilo Elam Haba, which is Elam HaYitzira, Gan Eden HaElyon, which is Elam Habriya. The world, the mother, the domain of the great Neshamas, and Neshamas itself, and Tzarech Elohim HaMalachim, how much more so Malachim, because Malachim we know by definition are lower than Neshamas. It's also Gvul V'Tachlis. It's also limited. It's about a expression or an experience of the finite, because yesh gvul l'asagos mein Sof Baruch Hu. What does it say about the neshamas? Yeshvin v'neni miziv hashchina. They sit and they take pleasure. How do they take pleasure? When you tell somebody, learn this Blat Gemara, and you don't know what you're talking about. And you sit and you'll again. It's always mentioned the other day that the people the importance to know when we come to learning, when we speak about learning Torah, just tangentially mentioning, it's about understanding the words of Torah. Because if you just sit in front of the Gemara and you don't know what's going on, you turn the page and you don't really know what's going on, it's not considered a learning at all. So we mentioned many times it's wonderful, it's better than sleeping, to come to a shir, and better doing other things. You're sitting in front of a Torah, something you hear, something there's a story, but to say you understood it, the following doesn't mean, it's not about understanding. In other words, the following, the words, and if you don't understand, in the end of the day, you don't have the mitzvah of limud Torah. Because learning Torah is about understanding, appreciating what you're learning. So, on top of all that, no one could come out of a shir, a particular shir, and say, I woke up 4:45, and I went to a shir which was 5:30, and I sat through it. Don't really know what it said, but it was such a geshmaka shir. What a geshmaka piece of Gemara. It's not true. It wasn't really geshmak, because if you didn't know what was going on in the Gemara, you could say the experience was geshmak. You get up in the morning, you sit up with certain people. It says a number of places that morning hour is so special and unique. Associated with Loivin Ha'elyon, the supreme whiteness. That's why people have morning Seder. They're aroused in those morning hours. The Gemara says someone learns Torah at night, any time at night. It says Chut Shel Chesed, Moshchol B'Yom, a stream of kindness, a certain grace is present on his face, or it's very indicative of this grace, of this favor, of this grace, of this chesed, of this kindness, in his whole composure. Granted, it's something very special that you utilize. You didn't sleep through it. You utilized the opportunity to come together with Yidden and to feel that energy of the wee hours of the morning in the context of Avodas Hashem, serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Granted. But if you don't understand what the class was all about, you can't say the blat was a geshmak blat. Because geshmak comes together naturally in the context of study, comes together of understanding, appreciating what the Gemara said, the Rashi, the Kasha and Tosfos, the Rishon, the Achrein, the Marsha or the Pnei Yeshua. It's something that you appreciate, then you can say, that was geshmak. Because geshmak in the context of intellectual pursuit is when you thoroughly understand it. So therefore, when we speak about Gan Eden, it says Neshamas Yeshvin V'nenin Miziv Hashchina. They draw benefit, they draw delight, they draw pleasure from the ray of the Shekhinah. How do you draw pleasure from the ray of the Shekhinah? Is in the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah. Here we're talking about just deriving pleasure. The answer is because there is enormous in-depth perception of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Perception, understanding, literally appreciating Elokus. That's what Gan Eden is all about. And therefore, you could have a no. You could have a delightful. It's a delightful experience. So that tells us that if there's an existence of Gan Eden, something had to happen with the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, there had to be this enormous contraction which allowed Elokus to come, Elokus, in other words, to be understood, perceived, and appreciated. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Ein Sof. Ein Sof means it's infinite, beyond our capacity of comprehending and appreciating. So how is Gan Eden come to be? And what he's basically saying, Gan Eden, which is about perceiving, which is about understanding, and is about appreciating Elokus, could have never come about if the infinite light would just evolve one level after the other. And again, he uses that diagram of ilu v'olu, cause and effect. In other words, one level after the other. Not only Olam Hazeh would not be able to be created, as we just pointed out so clearly, the finite can never stand in the face of the infinite. He says, but even that very spiritual world, known as that spiritual level, spiritual experience, known as Gan Eden, may it be the inferior level of Gan Eden, may it be even the superior level of Gan Eden, Gan Eden Ha'elin, which is Neil Mabriya, which is Gan Eden is Gan Eden. It's about a revelation, total manifestation of Elokus, of godliness. So that could have also not been created, because there is an expression of the finite, the limited, because the fact that you say Neshamas Yeshvin V'nenin, not they're consumed into the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That wouldn't tell us, that would be possible if that was the structure of Gan Eden. But it's not the structure of Gan Eden, that the Neshama is consumed into the infinite of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No, it draws, it experiences delight because it perceives, it understands the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on that level. What Hashem shares with these Neshamas in depend what level of Gan Eden they are in. It says it's a number, there's many levels, but generally it's compartmentalized in the Gan Eden HaTacht, in the inferior Gan Eden, to the Gan Eden Ha'elin. So therefore, we must say that something happened, something transpired in order for the Gan Eden to come to be, because without that enormous symptom, without that enormous contraction, even Gan Eden couldn't have been. And Gan Eden is a spiritual domain, but if you say Tzadikim Yeshvin V'nenin Miziv Hashchina, they have they derive delight from the ray of the Shekhinah. That means they understand the dynamics of the Shekhinah. No, that's not a continuation of Hashem's infinity, because infinite does not, the finite never stands, the finite even in the context of appreciating Elokus, which is a total expression of the finite, because the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not come into a structure of seichel, understanding, appreciating, perceiving, thus deriving pleasure from. No, infinity is infinite. And that's what he says. Because there has to be a gvul, there's the even again, the Mabog and in Elyon, it's created in a way of gvul l'tachlis, limitation, because yesh gvul hasagosa. But in Tzim Baruch Hu, there is a limit of their perception in the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which shines upon them, Slapshus Chabad, in the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu invests in Chochma Bina Das, his own primarily, and that gives the ability for the neshamas to perceive Elokus, and therefore he says, therefore there's a limit to their pleasure, which means they don't get lost in the pleasure in a way that they're consumed into the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They say no, they maintain their structure. Neshama could be in Gan Eden for 10 years, for 15 years, for 500 years, or for 1,000 years and thousands of years. because it maintains its structure, because there's a gvul, there's a limit how much it has a no, how much it derives pleasure from the ray of the Shechina, Shnenim Ziv Shechina, which already tells us it's not the Shechina itself, it's the Ziv, it's the ray of the Shechina. Again, this point which he's bringing out over here lies therein in the word Ziv HaShechina. It's not the Shechina itself. Which, by the way, Shechina is also a condensed image, a condensed level of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, but at least we talk about the Shechina, in the end of the day, it's a Kodesh Baruch Hu, and therefore it carries as well, one way or another, the infinite energy of a Kodesh Baruch Hu, so it has to be a ziv, a ray from that Shechina, which is again the message is ultimately over here. Umisan Gebeit Hashem, and they derive the light from the infinite of Kodesh Baruch Hu. Kein Yechelu Kabbalah Novetainim Chisein Tzav Mamush Shalei Yizbatel Mimtzius Miyachzol Mekayran, that they could not have any appreciation of Elokus if it would just be an expression of Hashem's infinite light, even through the channels of cause and effect, a million times, a billion times. At the end of the day, it carries the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the neshama, anything comes, and even a pure neshama comes in the face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the face of the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it just kind of runs over the whole neshama, which is also a nivra, it's a created being, and the neshama would be consumed into the infinity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So when you say neshamas maintain their composure, they sit and they have a no miziv ashchina for many, many years, means they're not run over by anything, they're not consumed into the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They maintain structure, they maintain the Gan Eden being their habitat in order to constantly appreciate more, have more pleasure, but that itself says that it's a limited type, something very limited is fed, it trickles down to them. But why is it limited? If it's about Hashem Himself, the answer is that there you have the tzimtzumim, the great contractions and the great concealments over this very Ein Sof of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that ultimately, like we said before, the Lashon and Eitz Chaim, akav kotem v'kotzer, a small little stream of light enters into the space which HaKadosh Baruch Hu removed as Eirei Abilti Balgvul, his infinite light, al hatzad, to the side, all sides for that matter, and Hashem allows a little bit of light to trickle in. That is that great symptom, the great contraction, which allowed all these elements to be created, emanated, and ultimately created. And even this physical world could have its appearance, and could exist the way it exists, totally giving off this, or totally limited, not only giving off this limited image, it is a limited image. So it ultimately could be created because of its tzimtzum. But even the Gan Eden Ha'elin, Gan Eden Ha'tachtin, also needs tzimtzum, and because of this great contraction, they're inexistent. Again, and they're closer a bit to that kav, to that stream, and therefore they have a no from Ziv HaShechina. They derive true pleasure and delight from the ray. Remember the ray of the Shechina, and therefore they can maintain their existence and constantly perceiving and constantly deriving pleasure. This comes through this great tzimtzum. You know, there's different levels of tzimtzum in contractions, Lashon many times in Tanya, in Chassidus, in Kabbalah, in Likkutei Torah, many contractions, till the product, the way it is, comes out on the other end. If it's Eilam Hazeh, we can appreciate there's many more contractions of Eilam Hazeh over Eilam Haba, because there at least you have the sensation of Elokus, you have the sensation of godliness. Post Eilam Hazeh, it's a place which on its own, prior to man serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which again, the service is ultimately, the punchline of Hashem's service is to introduce that Emes Hashem La'elam, to introduce the true reality of the world, that it's ultimately also a manifestation of God. But that takes a lot of avodah, because the world on its own does not demonstrate that oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, quite to the contrary. It's a Ani V'Afsiyah, here I am, as we all know it. We have to introduce, again, the truth, the core essence of the etzem of it. We have to be introduced, telling the world, no, you are inherently connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's the avodah. The Yid takes worldly matters, which is the significant majority of our mitzvahs, deal with worldly matters, and to take that and to make them mitzvahs, to point out the world is ultimately a world of Hashem. And that is our mandate. But till we get to that point, the world is a world which not only doesn't demonstrate the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the contrary. So that this whole phenomenon of Oilimus in general, if it's this physical world and even the spiritual world comes through the great Tzimtzumim, the great contractions. And what Dr. Rebbe is going to get at is going to explain us what really happened at the end and why this Hashem's objective of this very physical world to be created, and what is, in the end of the day, how does that as well demonstrate to us his great love. And the Lashon Ava Dechekes HaBasar, which is going to culminate in Perek Mem Tes, but he goes through step by step the entire evolution from the way it is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu until he comes again. This is the message of Mem Ches that's ultimately going to lead, even though this in itself is important information. This is the famous Perek which the Alter Rebbe introduces, the Seviv Kol Almin dynamic, which we spoke so many times. And then eventually the Alter Rebbe comes and brings this message home, how it expresses Hashem love to us, and ultimately our absolute reciprocation of that manner. Have a wonderful evening.